all of a sudden Joe Mixon and Giovanni Bernard forgot how to run the football. They didn't forget, ladies and gentlemen. Nobody's blocking for them. Just like nobody was blocking for Andy Dalton last night. They're awful. Just smacked around and pushed around. Talk about how they got embarrassed on Monday Night Football. The organization has historically been an embarrassment. Because you got an owner who's cheap. He's a miser. He's about underpaying dudes and keeping more money in his pocket. He doesn't prioritize winning. He robs the citizens of Cincinnati every damn year. Now, don't get me wrong. I am in complete support of Marvin Lewis being gone. Don't y'all think for 1 second that I've backtracked from that position. I've never once said that Marvin Lewis doesn't deserve to be a head coach. What I said is he doesn't deserve to be the head coach of the Cincinnati Bengals, because when you go 16 years and can't win one damn playoff game, you've had your time. It is a disgrace for anybody to be allowed to stay in a position where they are stagnant, there is no growth, there is continual ineptitude. That is not setting an example, particularly when you're asking other folks to patronize your product with their money. It's not right. You can't sit up there and come short. 16 years without a playoff win? 16 years. Ladies and gentlemen, 16 years ago, I had an afro. You could have called me Michael Jackson, or Michael Jackson's little cousin from the Jackson 5. That's what you could have called me. I had an afro 16 years ago. I don't want to hear no damn thing about Marvin Lewis. 16 years, you couldn't win one playoff game. Not one. I stand by my position on Marvin Lewis. I mean, no harm to him and his family. I don't want him not receiving a paycheck. I don't want him to have an inability to feed his family and to take care of his bills and all of this other stuff. I don't give a damn what money you give him. He just shouldn't be as the head coach of the Cincinnati Bengals. His career is over. I can't see it any other way.
The NFL suspended Raiders linebacker Vontaze Burfict the rest of the season, including the playoffs.
This is who he is.
Someone who disrespects not only the game, but the people on the field the way Vontaze Burfict has. Do not allow him to play in the NFL anymore.
That should be the last snap he is ever allowed on a professional football field in his life.
How many warnings is he supposed to receive before he learns the error of his ways? His career is over.
The Stephen A. Smith Show on ESPN Radio is presented by Progressive Insurance. Guests on the Stephen A. Smith Show appear via the Shell Pennzoil.
Leading into this show is that myself, Mike Greenberg, and others, nothing but respect for all of our opinions. But when it comes to something like this involving Vontaze Burfict, I think the most profound voices on this subject matter should be guys who played the game. I don't always feel that way. First of all, they ain't always objective. Secondly, they ain't always as knowledgeable as they try to come across. And by that, I'm not questioning their knowledge. I'm questioning their willingness to elocute and articulate their knowledge of the sport in a very candid fashion, the way somebody like myself and many others would. Okay? So there is a trustworthiness that comes along with people who are pundits, commentators, journalists in the industry that you can rely upon more so than the players themselves. But in certain issues, when it comes to what a football play actually was / is, and the repercussions that should come associated with it, I think it's important to make sure those voices are front and center. So even though I have the Stephen A. Smith Show and I've got my own television show and I've got my own radio show, and I'm all over Sports Center and Beyond and all of that other stuff, on an issue like this, that's why I want to hear from Ryan Clark. That's why I want to hear from Marcus Spears. That's why I want to hear from Damian Woody. That's why I appreciate John Runyon and, executive VP with the National Football League who handed down this penalty to Vontaze Burfict. Oh, by the way, Derek Brooks, who's in charge of appeals, if I remember correctly, for the National Football League. I want to hear from somebody like him. I want to hear from them before I hear from Roger Goodell. And by the way, props to Roger Goodell in the National Football League office because they made sure players made this decision about Vontaze Burfict, not some, political figurehead or something like that. Somebody from the corporate side making that call. Having said all of that, I think in the case of Vontaze Burfict, no matter how saddened his teammates are for the Oakland Raiders about him being exiled from the league, at least momentarily, I think it's important to keep in mind that former football players are the ones handing down this punishment. That's important to point out. By the way, a reminder that Golick and Wingo will be live from Dallas, Texas this Friday covering the Packers-Cowboys matchup this weekend. Part of ESPN Radio's Fall Football Tour, brought to you by Marathon. Get 5 cents off every gallon every day with Make It Count rewards from Marathon. To sign up, visit MakeItCount.com or download the free app. Let's go to the phones. 888-SAY-ESPN. Let's go to Joe. You're live with Stephen A. Talk to me, Joe.
Hey, how you doing, Stephen A?
I'm all right. Go ahead.
Got a question for you about the Bears.
I know you got a question. You're on the line. Go ahead.
All right. The 2019 Bears defense, how comparable do you think it is to the 1985 Bears defense?
Well, I think it's comparable. I don't know which one's better or not. The game of football was a lot different then. I think we've got to take that into consideration. I also think we got to take into consideration that Jim McMahon was your quarterback, Sweetness, Walter Payton was your running back. So you had a running game, all right, to couple and augment that fearsome defense. What do you have in Chicago right now? Offensively, there's nothing definitive that you can rely upon, primarily because Mitchell Trubisky, he's a question mark, okay? When you think of him, and listen, I'm not saying he's a scrub. I'm not saying he can't play. There's a guy that once he was drafted and went to the United Center for a game, got booed. And from what I'm being told, is incredibly sensitive to criticism and beyond. I get all of that. And so it might be a mental thing with him. But here's the reality. He doesn't look like Patrick Mahomes, who the Chicago Bears passed over for him. And he doesn't look like Deshaun Watson, who the Chicago Bears passed over for him. And as long as those two dudes are looking like the studs that they look like, Mitchell Trubisky's going to have a difficult time gaining respect in the National Football League.
But in terms of the Bears, they obviously have better defenses than the Chiefs and the Texans. Do you think they have what do you think they're... Well,
first of all, I don't think the Texans are a better team than the Chicago Bears, but I do think the Kansas City Chiefs are. I do. I think their offense is prolific, and I think their defense, as horrid as it may be sometimes, can still make a couple of stops or whatever. I think they would beat the Bears. I think the Cowboys are better than the Bears. They're a more complete team than the Chicago Bears. But I think the Bears' defense is elite, but I think we know more about it if their offense could do something, anything. And that's not the case right now. Got to run. Appreciate the call. Janelle, you're live with Stephen A. Go ahead.
Hey, Stephen A., good to talk to you again. Real quick, NCAA comment. I think something that they can't obviously come out and say, well, actually the schools, not really the NCAA itself. I think a few weeks ago you said about 75% of the teams cheat in some way, shape, or form.
I didn't say that. Somebody else said that, but go ahead.
Somebody else, right. If that's true or anywhere around that number, they can't come out and say, if these kids can make money off their likeness, that's going to affect our ability to cheat. Because if I'm a kid and I'm a top recruit and I want to stay home in Indiana, but I have schools like UCLA offering me money to come there, schools like Arizona offering me money to come there, but I can make my own money at Indiana. I have representation. I have an agent. I can get endorsements. Then I don't have to go to those schools. And that's going to affect their ability to recruit the kids that they want. Because
so you're saying that the NCAA isn't necessarily telling the truth by walking around with the assumption that individual institutions, mid-levels and beyond, are going to be hurt by the athlete being able to monetize their own name, likeness, and brand, that they could actually end up working in favor of the smaller nondescript schools, because if you can get some money from them, if you can get compensated in those respective local markets, it would be just as good for them as if they went somewhere else.
Absolutely.
You might have a point. You might have a point, but let me ask you this question. If you're working for a big-time corporation, right, and you can monetize your brand, but then you're working for a small-time corporation in a small market, meaning, and they can monetize your brand as well, right? Who has more money?
The bigger company.
So if the bigger company has more money, even though both have the license to monetize, your brand, the fact of the matter is there's more money available in the bigger markets, which is one of the issues. It's almost like professional sports needing revenue sharing, because without that, how could the smaller markets compete? Luxury taxes and things of that nature that have been implemented into CBAs and all of this other stuff, meaning collective bargaining negotiations and what have you. Why? Because you're working to even the playing scales so the larger markets don't have such a decisive advantage over the smaller markets. One could argue salary caps are in existence because of that, etc. You see what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm. I agree. And mostly my point is directed towards like recruitment. And, like, the money they offer kids under the table to come to the school. If they have an agent or if they have somebody that's able to be like, hey, I know this school is offering you $100,000 to play,
right, but
if you really want to play for UCLA, I could get you $100,000 in endorsement. You don't have to go over there.
I understand.
So
I understand.
That they have more options.
It makes sense. I understand. But they could make the argument that if somebody could offer you $100,000 in the smaller market, you'd probably ask for $300,000 in the larger market. They could make that argument, but I totally get what you're saying, and they're valid points to your argument. I appreciate the call, Janelle. Thank you so much. Feel free to keep in touch. Call back anytime. 888-SAY-ESPN is always the number to call up. We'll close out the show with your calls in a minute. By the way, when it comes to hiring, you don't have time to waste. You need to get to your short list of qualified candidates fast. That's why you need Indeed.com. Post a job in minutes. Set up screening questions based on your job requirements. Then zero in on qualified candidates using an